My dad laughed when I inherited the house. Laughed like it was a punchline I had walked straight into. The room smelled of polished wood and secondhand contempt. I sat at the edge of the conference table, coat still damp from the drizzle outside, watching the rain trickle down the window like it, too, was trying to escape this moment. Gerald, our family's longtime attorney, flipped the final page of the will with the kind of grim ceremony usually reserved for funeral processions. Which, in a way, this was. When I returned to Springvale for my grandfather's funeral, I expected disappointment. Maybe a polite nod, maybe nothing at all, but I wasn't prepared for the laughter. Or for the way it echoed. Victor was already smirking. He had the kind of smugness that came from being told your entire life you were destined for something. And now, he had it everything. The property, the accounts, even the antique collection. Gerald read the list like a grocery receipt ending with, "And to Sabrina Reeves." The residence at 14 Greystone Road and a sum of $10. My ears buzzed. I blinked once. Then again. I waited for a correction, a line that began with "but also." Nothing came. My father, Richard, exhaled a chuckle. Then another. It built, growing into something hollow and theatrical. Fitting, he said, not even looking at me. That old wreck for our family's wreck. The room laughed with him, some politely, some awkwardly. I just stared at Gerald. And for a fraction of a second, he didn't meet my eyes. I didn't ask why. I didn't argue. I just stood, nodded my thanks like a guest leaving a dinner party, and walked out without another word. Silence had always been my sharpest weapon. The house stood at the edge of Greystone Road, hunched like an old woman nursing secrets. Paint peeled from its siding shutters, hung crooked, and the porch groaned under my steps. But I didn't recoil. I had memories here. Some real, some reimagined. My grandfather used to call it the stubborn house. It never asked for more than it needed, and it never left. Inside, the air was musty but not unpleasant. Dust floated like snow in slivers of afternoon light. The wallpaper had curled at the corners, the floor creaked with every shift of weight. And yet, it wasn't just decay. It was pause, a story waiting for the next page. I moved through the rooms, slowly, fingertips brushing against furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts, politely waiting their turn. The living room was exactly as I remembered: fireplace, with a crooked frame of my mother and me, a brass lamp that still worked when I flicked the switch. Someone had been here recently. The kitchen drawers were empty, too empty. Even in death, my grandfather had been precise, deliberate. He didn't believe in empty gestures. He once said, "A gift can be a key, but only if you look where it leads." At the time, I thought it was one of his poetic rambles. Now, I wasn't so sure. In the study, I found a strange pause in the air, as if something had been removed. A clean space on the shelf, no dust. A mark on the carpet where a piece of furniture had stood for years, now gone. I stepped back and scanned the room again. Something wasn't right. On the desk, tucked beneath a cracked leather blotter, was a small envelope addressed to SR in handwriting I hadn't seen since I was 13. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a single line: "You'll know it when you see it. Trust only the paper trail." I sat down slowly. That same tension from Gerald's face returned to my memory, the almost imperceptible falter in his voice when he read my part of the will. As if he knew something more, as if he had been told not to say it. Outside, the wind kicked up rustling dead leaves across the porch. The house creaked again, not with collapse, but with memory. I didn't know what I'd find in there, but something told me it wouldn't be worthless. The house wasn't crumbling, it was grieving. Every step I took was like an apology to the floorboards. The rain outside had settled into a steady rhythm, tapping on the windows like fingers drumming on a coffin lid. I paused in the foyer, glancing around the dim interior that once echoed with childhood laughter. Now it swallowed sound like a cathedral built for mourning. I remembered running through its halls as a child, but now it felt like a mausoleum with unfinished business. Boxes lined the hallway untouched. I opened one and found old photographs, some yellowed at the edges, others water-damaged beyond recognition. In the parlor, a battered photo album rested beneath a stack of newspapers. When I opened it, half the pages had been torn out, the rest singed, as if scorched in a failed attempt to destroy them. One corner bore a faded note in my grandfather's handwriting. Names must be remembered. I spent the afternoon clearing dust from the bookshelves in the study. One of the panels near the base caught my eye, warped slightly out of alignment. I tapped it. Hollow. The edge splintered just enough for me to pry it loose. Behind it was darkness. A narrow, unlit staircase spiraled down. The air shifted the moment I stepped into the cellar. Damp and heavy, like the space hadn't breathed in years. I descended slowly, brushing cobwebs aside, each step groaning in protest. At the bottom, I found a rusted trunk lodged against the far wall. No lock I could see, but it wouldn't budge. I pulled, twisted, nothing. It was sealed by something older than rust. The cellar was otherwise empty, save for a single shelf holding a candle stub and a cracked glass jar. I lit the candle. Its weak glow made the space look like a forgotten vault. Suddenly, floorboards creaked above me. I froze, listening. A soft knock echoed from upstairs. I climbed up quickly, heart pounding, only to find the front door slightly ajar. Standing on the porch, soaked from the rain, but composed as ever, was Esther. My grandfather's widow? She hadn't spoken to me in years. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner eyes ringed with shadows. She didn't say a word, just looked past me into the house. Her gaze settled somewhere behind me, as if she knew what I had found. "Esther," I asked, stepping forward. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked down the path without a sound, her footsteps vanishing into the mist. I closed the door slowly and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. My phone buzzed. "Celeste," her voice cut through the stillness. "You okay out there?" "It's storming pretty bad." "Yeah," I replied. "Just memories." "Need me to come by? Bring coffee and garlic knots." I smiled despite myself. "Not yet. I need to figure something out first." The rain softened. I went back to the study and continued sorting through drawers. In one of them, nestled beneath a stack of empty envelopes, I found a small leather pouch. Inside it was an old pocket watch. It didn't tick, but the engraving on the back made my breath hitch. Only the one who remembers can open. My fingers curled around it. The metal felt warm, impossibly, so like it had been waiting. I walked to the window and glanced out. Esther was gone. She said nothing, but the look in her eyes told me she knew everything. They thought it was a joke. It turned out to be a receipt. I sat alone at the dining table in the old house, a single desk lamp casting weak shadows onto the cluttered surface. In front of me lay the $10 bill, creased and water-stained, still bearing the faint scent of cedar and dust. I hadn't paid it much attention during the will reading. It seemed like a final jab from a family that never hid their contempt. But now, under the dim light, something caught my eye. A whisper of ink just off the portrait's edge. I leaned closer. 2 initials, N.R., and a date, October 14th, 1983. The year alone stirred a chill in me. That was before I was born. Why would he date something to a time I didn't even exist? And why the initials of Naomi Reeves, his late wife? My grandmother, curiosity trumped sleep. I grabbed my coat, stuffed the bill into a book to flatten it, and drove to the Springvale Library. It wasn't open yet, but Mrs. Dodd Ever, the early riser, let me in with a raised brow. "Didn't expect to see a Reeves this early," she said. I offered a smile I didn't mean and slipped into the archive room. I spread out several books across the table. Local property laws, business registrations, even newspaper microfilm reels. Nothing on October 14th jumped out, but I wasn't sure what I was even looking for. Still, the $10 bill itched at me like a splinter under the skin. It couldn't just be a date. It had to be a clue. Something left behind deliberately. I scanned the bill again, holding it up to the fluorescent light. There were tiny impressions in the corner, like it had once been pressed against something. I pulled out a magnifying glass. Not impressions numbers. A registration code of some kind. Too faded to read entirely. I knew I needed help. Not from my family. from someone who remembered things, someone who'd kept records. Marcus's Pawn and Antiques sat on the corner of Walnut and Fifth, a forgotten pocket of the town, much like the man who ran it. He was hunched over a stack of silver cutlery when I entered. The door's bell jingled like a nervous laugh. "Well, well," he muttered, peering at me. "Thought you were gone for good." "I need to ask about something my grandfather left here," I said, unwrapping the bill. He told me this might lead to something. Marcus took the bill with a delicacy that surprised me. His gaze sharpened as he tilted it toward the light, then without a word, he turned and walked into the back. I stood there surrounded by antiques and ticking clocks, the scent of varnish and time thick in the air. When he returned, he was holding a thick manila envelope, yellowed with age, bound with a faded red string. "This," he said, placing it in front of me, "has been waiting for someone who brings that exact bill. Your grandfather was meticulous about it. Wouldn't tell me what was inside, just that it was for you. Only you." My fingers trembled as I untied the string. Inside was a land deed dated October 14th, 1983. I blinked, certain I was misreading it. The owner listed Sabrina Reeves, me. "That's not possible," I whispered. "I wasn't even born then." Marcus said nothing, just watched as I unfolded the rest. It was a plot of land south of the river, marked in precise coordinates, a sliver of real estate I'd never heard of. It wasn't in the family registry or any of the wills I'd seen. And yet, here it was, filed, notarized, and witnessed. I flipped to the bottom. 2 signatures. The first was familiar. My grandfather's penmanship, always graceful and firm. The second gave me pause. The ink was smudged the curve of the R, oddly angular. A counterfeit if I ever saw one. My phone buzzed. "Victor, heard you're playing detective. Good luck with that spooky attic. And hey, keep the change." I put the phone down, slowly, eyes still on the page. There were 2 signatures. One was his, the other looked forged. Secrets don't rot. They stain. The smell of antiseptic clung to the walls of the law office, as if it were trying to scrub out the secrets that had been whispered here for decades. I stepped through the glass door with the forged deed in my coat pocket, the folded edges creased from being opened too many times since I found it. The receptionist gave me a tight smile, one that didn't reach her eyes, and gestured toward Gerald's office. No pleasantries, no warmth, just protocol. He barely looked up when I entered. "Miss Reeves," he said, as if tasting something bitter. Back so soon, I laid the document flat on his desk. "This isn't your usual kind of oversight." He adjusted his tie. His eyes scanned the page, lingered on the signatures. "It's just old paperwork. Your grandfather held on to all sorts of irrelevant documents." "Irrelevant," I leaned in. "This has my name on it. From 1983. Signed by him and someone else." Gerald sat back. "Which proves what exactly? That someone else tried to erase it." He shrugged, but his fingers twitched. "Be careful where you dig, Sabrina. Some legacies are best left buried." I almost laughed. "You're threatening me with metaphors now." He didn't respond, just reached for his stapler and began rearranging papers that didn't need rearranging. Across the room, Danica Pierce watched from behind a partition. The junior attorney, always silent during meetings, always typing just a second too slow to keep up. But now, her eyes met mine. Something flickered there. Not surprise, not curiosity. Recognition. I exited without another word, the echo of Gerald's warning sticking to my skin like humidity. Out in the hallway, I paused by the water cooler, staring at the outdated employee photos framed on the wall. Danica's picture was there, last row right corner. Her expression in that still frame matched the one I had just seen, restrained urgency. As I reached for the elevator button, a hand brushed my arm. Danica stood close, voice low. "You should come back," she said. "Not to him, to me, when you have more." "More? What?" She hesitated. "Evidence. There might be another version of the will. But I can't help unless you give me a reason." My heart picked up speed. "Do you know something I know?" "The house wasn't a mistake," she said, then walked away before I could ask more. Later that evening, I returned to the house, still damp from rain, still heavy with silence. I sat on the steps, trying to piece together the fragments. I'd collected photo albums, the pocket watch, the forged signature, and now, a possible second will. A knock on the door broke my thoughts. Esther stood there, umbrella dripping. "You're not wrong," she said. "Just not ready." Before I could speak, she turned and left. I stayed awake most of that night, circling the same question. What was I missing? Why give me a house, a bill, a deed, all seemingly useless, unless it was all pointing towards something layered beneath the legal surface? By morning, I had decided I wasn't going to wait for someone else to validate my suspicion. I was going to find that second will if it existed, and I'd start with Danica. She had the key, and I wasn't the only one who knew it. It wasn't just a cellar. It was a vault of intent. By the time the morning frost had retreated into the shadows of the woods behind the house, I was already kneeling on the basement floor, the pocket watch pressed into my palm like it still carried heat from the man who'd worn it. The air was thick with damp and disuse, and the light bulb overhead flickered like it wasn't sure this secret was ready to be revealed. Esther stood at the bottom of the steps, wrapped in a wool coat that had seen better winters. She hadn't said a word since arriving, just nodded once when I showed her the rusted trunk. And now, as I traced the worn lines of the lock, she cleared her throat. "He always said memory was stronger than metal," she murmured. I looked up. "He said that?" She shrugged, then pointed to the watch. "Try pressing the stem. Not turning it. Press." The thought hadn't occurred to me. I did as she said, and with a slow, reluctant click, the lock surrendered. I opened the trunk. Inside, the smell hit, first age paper and faint cedar, like old letters tucked inside a drawer no one had dared open. On top lay a leather pouch worn and buckled. Beneath that, a stack of documents wrapped in wax paper. And at the bottom, like an afterthought or a threat, a cassette tape labeled in my grandfather's blocky print, "For her only." I didn't touch it right away. My fingers went instead to the document's handwritten notes, diagrams, legal pages. Then I found it. The will, or rather, a will, dated October 2nd in 2023. My name was there. Bold. Singular. No mention of Victor. No mention of anyone else. I looked at Esther. Her expression didn't change. He didn't want to fight, but he knew there would be one. "Why hide this?" I asked, my voice catching. "To give you time." And because he knew Gerald wouldn't tell the truth. She turned to leave, and I wanted to stop her. I wanted her to stay and explain more. But all she said was, "When you're ready, listen to the tape." And she was gone. I spent the rest of the morning cataloging every paper in that trunk. My hands shook when I touched the edges of the will. Something about its weight, its finality settled into my chest like cement. I called Celeste that afternoon. "There's another will," I said, my voice barely audible over the static. "Signed, witnessed. He left it for me. And a tape, she echoed. What kind cassette? Old school, labeled "For her only." "Oh my God, Sabrina. That's like a mystery novel. Are you going to listen?" "Not yet. I don't know why, but I can't. Maybe it's not time," she said gently. Just before dusk, Derek showed up. I'd called him earlier about a leak behind the fireplace, expecting a simple fix, not another turn in the story. He was tall, maybe late 30s, with dark hair and the kind of quiet confidence that made you listen, even when he wasn't speaking. His flannel shirt was damp with the misty air outside, and he carried a toolbox that looked older than I was. "The mortar's separating," he said, tapping the brickwork. "Sometimes moisture gets in, pushes out the seal. But this sounds hollow." He rapped his knuckles against the stone. Sure enough, an echo faint but unmistakable. He removed the top layer of bricks slowly, carefully, and behind them was a metal door flush against the wall. "A safe?" I asked, breathless. "Looks that way. Been here a long time?" The safe had no handle, just a dial and a keyhole. I instinctively brought the pocket watch close. When I pressed its back panel, something shifted, a hidden chamber popped open. Inside was a small slip of paper with 3 numbers. A combination. I turned the dial with measured patience, afraid that rushing it would collapse the moment. First number? second, third, then click. The door opened inward with a groan. Inside was another sealed envelope thicker than the last. I opened it slowly. Another will. This time with different witness signatures. And there, tucked beside it in the foam lining, was a second cassette. This one had no label at all. I turned to Derek, whose eyebrows had lifted at the sight of the documents. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I whispered. "But this changes everything. You're in the middle of something big, aren't you?" I nodded slowly. I carried the tapes to the kitchen table and set them side by side. The labeled one sat like an accusation. The unlabeled one like a dare. I hadn't even pressed play yet, but I already knew the voice would break everything. He didn't leave me love. He left me a mission. The cassette player clicked in my trembling hands. I sat alone on the basement floor, rain tapping against the high window like fingers too polite to knock, but too persistent to ignore. The old tape was already wound into place. Derek had offered to stay nearby on the stairs, but said nothing. Just his presence anchored me, while everything else felt like it might float away. A breath, then static, then his voice. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone." Good. It didn't sound like a farewell. It sounded like a challenge. Like he knew this day would come and planned for it. Not with sentiment, but with precision. The tape crackled again, and I could hear him shift his weight before continuing. "I don't have much time. They're watching everything, even now. If you're smart enough to have found this, then maybe, just maybe, you're smart enough to survive what comes next." My pulse hammered. The chill from the floor climbed into my skin. I never trusted Gerald. I tolerated him. And Victor's loyalty ended the day I got diagnosed. He started asking about documents, about deed transfers, about wills. He wasn't subtle. I looked over my shoulder. Derek's eyes met mine from the steps, cautious but steady. He didn't ask what it meant. He just watched. Maybe that was all I needed. I made another will. A real one. One they couldn't manipulate. But it won't hold without the ledger. That's the anchor. The receipts, the withdrawals, the dates, the proof of their hands inside my accounts. You'll know it when you see it. He paused. The silence buzzed like live wire. You have to find it before they do. Go to Redwood Trust Bank, safety deposit box number 314. On October 25th. Ask for Mrs. Timmons. She knows. She helped me arrange it before the stroke. October 25th. That gave me 2 days. I left you the watch for a reason. It opens more than you realize. If you've used it already, good. If not, hold on to it. It's tied to the ledger. I couldn't say more, not on tape. I sat up straighter, instinctively pressing my thumb to the side of the old pocket watch in my hoodie pocket. It was warm. Or maybe I was just projecting hope onto it. You might be asking why I didn't just leave it all clean and simple. Why the games, his voice turned softer. Because men like Victor, like your father, they don't respect clean. They only understand war. So I've given you weapons. Quiet ones, legal ones. My breath caught on the word father. I watched Richard destroy what he didn't understand. He twisted your mother into silence. He's dangerous not because he's loud, but because he's calculating. Be smarter. A deep exhale came through the speaker. Then a short silence. I almost thought the tape had ended. But then, Sabrina, I didn't raise you, but I knew you. I saw the way you studied people. I saw what they never did. You asked the questions that make men uncomfortable. Don't stop asking. I felt tears crawl up behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not here. Not yet. You'll be tempted to run. To think none of this is worth it. They'll count on that. But you've already found more than they ever expected. The tape clicked softly, like a heartbeat skipping. Final thing, if that box is empty, walk away. You'll have no case, no leverage. But if it's not, if what I left is still there, you go all the way. You take everything back. You make them wish they'd left you alone. Click. Silence. I sat frozen, staring at the machine. Derek finally stood, slowly descending the last step. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer empty comfort. Instead, he picked up the tape, examined it for a moment, and handed it back to me with the kind of reverence people usually reserve for gravestones. "Do you believe it?" he asked gently. I nodded, fingers curling tightly around the cassette. "I don't have the luxury of doubt." And then aloud, more to myself than to him. "If that box was empty, I'd lose everything. If it wasn't, they would. Not everything valuable rattles. Some things whisper." I parked across the street from Redwood Trust Bank, my hand still gripping the steering wheel even after I'd turned off the engine. The air was thick with autumn dampness, and my breath left faint clouds on the windshield. October 25th. The date on the tape. The day everything could change or collapse. The bank was tucked between a law office and an upscale coffee shop, its stone facade unassuming to the average passerby. But I wasn't average anymore. I had a key. I had a voice from the past guiding my steps, and I had exactly one shot. Inside the marble floors, clicked under my boots. The bank was quiet, too quiet, the kind of institutional silence where every movement feels amplified. A receptionist gave me a tight smile before I approached the front desk. "I have an appointment to access. Box number 314, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The manager, a tall woman in a tailored gray suit, looked up from her monitor. "Name's Sabrina Reeves. It should be under my grandfather's arrangement. Howard Reeves." She nodded slowly, scanning something. Then a flicker of recognition or caution crossed her face. One moment. She returned with a key and led me to a private hallway. We walked past 3 doors before she unlocked the vault access room and gestured for me to enter. "Once you're inside, you'll be alone. There's a timer, 20 minutes. When time's up, the door buzzes." Inside the vault, the cold hit differently, deeper, older. The air smelled of dust and old ink. She guided me to a row of boxes. Number 314 sat waist-high, discreet and plain. My fingers trembled as I pulled out the pocket watch. I pressed the stem again, and the back clicked open, revealing the small secondary key I hadn't noticed until now. It fit. Inside the box was a single item, a black leather-bound ledger, aged but pristine. I lifted it carefully, like it might crumble if I breathed too hard. Beneath it, tucked into the felt lining, were a set of photocopied documents, wire transfers, handwritten notes, and something that made my stomach twist, an amendment page from the will, time-stamped and notarized 2 days before his death. I flipped open the ledger. Page after page of financial records, withdrawals, deposits, a pattern I didn't fully understand yet but knew was important. And there, paperclip to a page in the middle, Reeves and Covers transactions. Account numbers. Dates. Victor's name scribbled beside them in thick blue ink. I closed the book, breath catching in my throat. He hadn't just stolen from the family. He'd laundered money through the company. And Gerald had either helped or looked away. The vault timer buzzed, faintly, pulling me back. I returned the box, tucked the ledger into my tote bag, and walked back through the front lobby. That's when I saw him. Across the street, pretending to be on a call, stood a man in a navy overcoat and sunglasses, Gerald's assistant. The same one who'd poured coffee at the will reading and never made eye contact. But this time, he was looking right at me. I kept walking. My heart pounded, but my expression didn't shift. He didn't move. Just stood there, phone to his ear, still as stone. Back in the car, I locked the doors, started the engine, and yanked out my phone. Danica answered on the first ring. "Did you get it?" "I got it," I whispered. "The ledger. It's real." Transfers, dates, amendments. One of the pages has Victor's name next to a string of embezzled accounts. She didn't respond immediately. Then, calmly, "Good. Now, go quiet. What disappear for a few days? Don't go home. Don't use your credit cards. They'll know you've seen it." Someone was already watching me outside the bank. "I believe you," she said. "This is where it gets dangerous. That ledger isn't just paper. It's a grenade." I looked down at the bag in my lap. The weight of the ledger felt unnatural, denser than it should be, like it had mass beyond its pages. The light turned green, but I didn't drive. I just sat there for another second, breathing, knowing nothing could go back to how it was before. If I was a threat before now, I was a target. They gave me 10 days to vanish. I gave them 10 to confess. The apartment was barely furnished, just a couch, a desk, and a mattress on the floor, but it felt like a bunker. Every time a floorboard creaked, I held my breath. Every shadow near the window made my pulse spike, but it also gave me focus. With no distractions, no comfort, I had only the ledger and the will to do something with it. On the third night, I spread the documents across the table beneath the flickering light of a single candle. The electricity had cut out once already, and I hadn't reported it. I didn't want anyone, especially utilities, knowing I was here. Danica's voice echoed in my mind. Use the ledger wisely. It could bring down the whole firm. So I planned. Day 1, identify the most damning transactions. Day 2, draft letters citing them anonymously. Day 3, send them one to Gerald's office, one to Victor's email, one to the firm's insurance board. By day 4, they'd know someone was watching. I crafted each letter with surgical precision, quoting numbers only someone inside Reeves & Co. would recognize. Line item 47. Invoice discrepancies 2019 to 2021. You know what it means? No names, just shadows. Celeste stopped by briefly with food and a look of panic disguised as a smile. You look like a woman in a spy movie, she joked, setting the grocery bag down. Except you're not running. I don't plan to, I said. You should. I didn't respond. I couldn't explain to her that every day I stayed silent, they moved freer, and I had 10 days before their silence became a weapon. That night, Danica called. The freeze order is ready, she said. It's not full just enough to slow them. It'll show up in their Monday reports. Perfect. Be careful with Victor. He'll assume Gerald folded first. That could work in our favor. I'm counting on it. We ended the call. I turned back to the ledger, marking 2 more transfers in red ink. They formed a trail that looped through 5 shell companies, all tied somehow to a property in Maine. My grandfather had annotated it with a single word, insurance. I didn't know what that meant yet, but it felt like a breadcrumb. And I was done starving. Around midnight, Derek knocked. He stood outside holding a small toolbox and a bag of screws. You texted me about the door, he said. I thought the lock was sticking, I explained. But now, I'm not sure. He knelt by the front entrance while I hovered nearby. After a few minutes, he looked up. This strike plate, it was tampered with, slightly shaved down. My stomach flipped. Could someone have done that from the outside? If they had a bump key and patience? Yeah. He stood wiping his hands on his jeans. I'll fix it. But you need to be careful, Sabrina. This isn't just old paperwork anymore. I know. He hesitated. I brought a new bolt too. Deadbolt. Once I install it, don't open the door unless you see me. I nodded, more grateful than I could say. By the time he left, the apartment felt tighter. Safer. But not safe. I returned to my desk, lit another candle, and finished the last of the anonymous letters. Before sealing the envelope, I added one final line. 10 days. That's all you get. My hands were steady now. Not calm, steady, controlled. But just as I sat back, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then opened the message. You should have taken the $10 and walked. The screen glowed in the dark, the words slicing through the silence. My throat tightened. Not because I was afraid, but because they were finally showing their face. So they knew. Good. Let them watch me build the fire. They tried to bury me in a clause. I found the loophole. The courthouse reeked of old paper lemon cleaner and urgency. My boots clicked against the floor too loudly. Or maybe it was just my heart trying to match the rhythm of fear. I hadn't been served. No papers, no warning. Just a call from Danica at 7:11 a.m. They're pulling something. Get to the courthouse. Now. It was October 29th, day 4 of my 10-day countdown, and they were already playing offense. Courtroom 4C was cold, the kind of cold that got into your fingernails and made you feel like you didn't belong. The judge wasn't even on the bench when I arrived. Danica met me near the back, holding a thin file and a hard jawline. They've filed a motion, she said, claiming you're interfering with estate proceedings. Theft, trespass, instability. I blinked. instability. They're trying to discredit you emotionally, probably banking on the fact that you're acting alone and they have decades of credibility. I'm not alone. She allowed herself half a smile. Not today, you're not. The courtroom filled slowly. Gerald entered first, polished, smug, carrying a leather briefcase and the kind of smile that always came with backup plans. Victor followed, dressed in dark blue hair, slicked back jaw locked in what he must have thought looked like righteous anger. Then Judge Mallory appeared. Black robe, silver hair, and eyes that had seen through 100 lies before lunch. She adjusted her glasses and tapped the gavel once. Let's proceed with case 8037, Reeves estate interference. Gerald stood, his voice smooth as varnish. Your Honor, we are here today to address a pattern of concerning behavior. Ms. Sabrina Reeves has over the last week accessed restricted properties, removed sealed materials from private locations, and is attempting to present forged documents as legal evidence. He turned slightly toward me. We are requesting an immediate injunction preventing her from entering any properties or filing motions regarding the Reeves estate. The judge looked over her glasses. Miss Reeves, do you have counsel? Danica stood before I could speak. Danica Pierce, Your Honor. Junior Counsel Reeves and Comers, and now, representing Miss Reeves. Gerald's eyes narrowed slightly. Judge Mallory nodded. Very well. Response. Danica stepped forward. Your Honor, my client has done nothing unlawful. In fact, we intend to submit newly uncovered documents, including a notarized version of the late Howard Reeves's last will and financial evidence, calling into question the conduct of the current estate executor, Mr. Victor Caldwell. That got a reaction. Victor shifted. Gerald's lips twitched almost imperceptibly, but he didn't interrupt. Danica continued. We request a continuance. We need time to verify the ledger's authenticity and forensics on the document trail. We are not asking for judgment today, only that no actions be taken that would prejudice this matter while evidence is under review. The judge turned to me. Ms. Reeves, do you possess the original documents? I stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. In sealed condition. Present them. My fingers didn't tremble when I placed the padded envelope on the clerk's desk. Inside the alternate will the amended clause and the page from the ledger showing the embezzlement trail with Victor's signature beside it. Judge Mallory skimmed them briefly, sealed and time-stamped. Curious. Gerald tried to recover. Your Honor, anyone can fabricate documents with modern tools. This is nothing but an emotional reaction to a disappointing inheritance. Danica didn't blink. Then we welcome full forensic analysis and ask that until that time, no estate transfers or disbursements occur. The judge leaned back, considering. Outside rain pelted the windows like it was trying to get inside. After a long pause, she spoke. All estate asset movements will be frozen for 10 business days. No transfers, no sales, no access to firm-controlled financials. This court will reconvene once the presented evidence has been reviewed. Motion granted. Gerald's head barely moved, but I saw the twitch in his jaw. Victor turned to me, expecting a flinch. I met his gaze and didn't blink. For the first time, Victor didn't smile. He glared like a man who saw the end coming. It wasn't a second will. It was the first one they buried. The office was quiet, except for the hum of Danica's desk lamp and the sound of pages being flipped, signed, sealed, and copied again. The hour was past midnight, and the world outside her frosted window felt like it belonged to someone else. And in here, it was just the two of us. Me finally steady and her sharp as ever. Danica tapped her pen against the table. This affidavit has to be airtight. If they smell even a trace of doubt, they'll twist it. I nodded, reviewing the declaration again. The words blurred slightly from fatigue, but I kept reading. This was it. Not the game. The move. She continued, her tone more measured now. This will... The dates, the witnesses, the notary, everything lines up. Which means this wasn't replaced. It was suppressed. They buried it. Exactly. The implication hung there like smoke. Gerald didn't just misplace a document. He hid it. And Victor, He'd built a narrative around a lie, a fraud that had shaped everything: the money, the firm, my grandfather's legacy. We compiled the supporting documents, ledger pages, transaction reports, annotations in my grandfather's handwriting. It was all evidence now. Ammunition. There was a knock at the door. I tensed until I heard his voice. "It's just me." Derek stepped in carrying 2 takeout bags. "Didn't think you'd remember to eat?" I offered a tired smile. "You were right." He set the bags down and looked between us. "You two look like you're planning a war." Danica didn't glance up. "We are." He raised an eyebrow. "Just make sure you know what you're fighting for." I looked away. "Justice." Derek crossed his arms. "Or revenge, disguised as it." His words didn't sting. They reminded me of something older. Something I hadn't let surface until now. A flash of an autumn day. Years ago, me sitting across from my grandfather at a worn wooden chessboard. His knuckles marked with ink stains, his eyes gentle but sharp. "You can't win just by chasing their queen," he said, moving a pawn. "Control the center. Make them come to you, then they'll corner themselves." Back in the present, I took a deep breath. Danica broke the silence. "Once this is filed, they'll know we're not bluffing. There's no walking this back." I reached for the pen. The affidavit was already marked, each page tabbed with surgical precision. One more form. Challenge to estate distribution. Original will filed under dispute. I signed it. My hand didn't tremble. We would submit it in the morning, but the real decision happened here in this quiet room under cold fluorescent lights and stronger resolve. Danica stood and gathered the folders into a leather satchel. "Be at the courthouse by 8. Derek walked me out. The night air hit my face like a baptism, cold, honest, purifying. As he opened the car door for me, he looked over. "Whatever's waiting after this, I hope it brings you peace." "I don't need peace," I said softly. "I need the truth." And maybe when the dust settled, they'd be the same thing. At home, I stared at the signature I had scrawled earlier, mine, beside the name of a man who had trusted me to finish what he couldn't. This time, my signature didn't feel like a plea. It felt like a sword. They thought courtrooms favored the powerful. I walked in with the truth. The courthouse was different that day. Not just colder or more crowded, though it was both, but heavier. Like the truth itself had started to gather mass. Reporters lingered near the steps pens, clutched like weapons. Inside, the public benches filled fast whispers buzzing behind every shoulder. Danica and I waited just outside courtroom 2B. She checked her watch, then the folder under her arm. "You don't have to say much," she said. "But if you do, be precise." "I know." She looked at me. "Today isn't about proving everything. It's about cracking the shell wide enough to show there's something inside." I nodded. I wasn't here to win. I was here to reveal. The door opened. A bailiff called us in. The courtroom was full, far more than last time. Even Richard had shown up, arms folded, eyes scanning me like he was still trying to figure out how I hadn't disappeared into that crumbling house he laughed about. Victor sat 2 rows ahead, stiff in a tailored suit. Gerald leaned in, whispering something. Whatever it was, Victor didn't respond. His jaw was clenched too tightly. Judge Mallory entered, and the room stilled like it had been holding its breath. "This is the continued hearing of Reeves' estate matter." 8:37, she began. "All parties present." "Yes, Your Honor," Gerald said smoothly. Danica echoed the same, but without the syrup. "Proceed," the judge said. Gerald stood first. "Your Honor, while my opposing counsel has submitted what she claims is an original version of the Reeves, will we maintain that this document is either a forgery or a discarded draft, unfiled, unverified, and unsupported by any credible witness?" Danica rose her voice even. "We have submitted a full forensic timeline confirming the will's authenticity, notarization, and chain of custody. We also submit supporting documents recovered from the late Howard Reeves's personal vault, including a financial ledger detailing misappropriation of estate assets and a cassette tape recorded in Mr. Reeves's own voice." Mallory's eyes lifted. A tape Danica nodded. "Labeled, 'For her only.' We believe its contents are central to understanding Mr. Reeves's final intentions. Gerald smirked. Your Honor, we object to any audio presented without formal verification. Furthermore, the plaintiff, Ms. Reeves, has demonstrated erratic behavior, trespassing, and emotional volatility, which I believe discredits any narrative she presents here. That was the opening. I stood. Your Honor, may I speak? The judge studied me for a long beat. Proceed, Ms. Reeves. I stepped forward, holding the ledger in my hands. This isn't about behavior or bias. This is about money, transactions, theft. This ledger shows wire transfers from Reeves & Co. to offshore accounts under Victor Caldwell's name. It documents dates, amounts, signatures, including one from Gerald H. Langston on a falsified disbursement form. A ripple passed through the room. Even Richard sat up straighter. I held my breath. My grandfather didn't change his mind. He changed his method. He knew if he made noise, they'd bury him. So he made a map instead and gave me the pieces. Victor shifted in his seat. Danica set the small black cassette player on the evidence table. With the court's permission. The judge gave a slight nod. The room held its breath as Danica pressed play. My grandfather's voice filled the courtroom, warm, weathered, unmistakable. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't finish what I started. Victor pressured me. Gerald helped him. The original will, you'll know it when you find it, reflects what I truly intended. If they try to fight it, the ledger and this recording will show why. Victor's face flushed. He whispered something harsh to Gerald, who tried to shush him. But the tape continued. Check the account dated May 14, 2016. Offshore. In Victor's name. I'm not bitter. I just want the truth seen. Danica clicked the player off. Silence. Then Victor snapped, that tape could be fake. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Caldwell, you'll wait your turn. Victor stood anyway. She's lying. This is just a stunt. That house he left her a ruin, because that's all she deserves. Now he was yelling. Judge Mallory banged the gavel. Mr. Caldwell, sit down or be removed. Victor sat shaking. The judge turned to Danica. I'm ordering a formal investigation into the handling of the Reeves estate and potential fraudulent suppression of testamentary documents. She looked directly at Gerald and into those who managed the distribution. Danica nodded. Once then placed a fresh set of documents on the bench. I'll need time to review, the judge said. This hearing is adjourned until further notice. The gavel struck again. Outside the courtroom, voices rose. Reporters swarmed, cameras clicked. Richard slipped away down the hall unnoticed. Gerald stood frozen by the door, lips tight. Victor just stared at me like I was the ghost of something he thought he'd buried. Judge Mallory says, this changes everything. I'm ordering a formal investigation. They buried him with lies. I dug him out with proof. The courthouse smelled of burnt coffee and nerves. Paper shuffled like dry leaves on the wind. Every seat in the gallery buzzed with murmurs, some curious, some skeptical, but all aimed at me. I didn't care. I carried the weight of his voice in my chest, still echoing from the cassette tape. I wasn't here for vindication. I was here for the reckoning. Danica stood beside me, flanked by two stern-faced investigators from the IRS. One of them adjusted his glasses and looked toward the judge's bench. We've corroborated the entries in the ledger, he said plainly. Multiple wire transfers, off-the-book asset movements, and falsified audits traced directly back to Victor Caldwell. Victor sat across the room, skin-pale fingers clenching and unclenching against his knee. Gerald wouldn't meet my eyes. The silence between them wasn't coordination, it was collapse. Danica stepped forward. Your Honor, we have verified that a significant portion of the Reeves estate's operating funds were rerouted to shell corporations, most of which are now defunct or registered under Victor's longtime associate, Alan Griggs. The judge's pen stopped mid-scribble. You're saying this wasn't just mismanagement, Miss Pierce, no, Your Honor. It was calculated misappropriation. And the will that previously determined Mr. Caldwell as sole beneficiary was not only drafted under suspicious circumstances, but replaced by an earlier unfiled will. I kept my eyes fixed on Gerald. He looked smaller now, sunk in his tie askew as if the thread he clung to had finally frayed. The man who once warned me to be careful where I dug was now choking on the dirt he helped pile. Later that afternoon, Danica and I sat in her office. The blinds were drawn, but the light outside flickered through like prison stripes. She slid over a printed still from bank surveillance. "That's Gerald, the day after your grandfather's death. Same time he claimed he was traveling. In the image, he's shown speaking to a bank officer in the Redwood Trust lobby, gesturing toward the vault corridor. The timestamp matched the date on the safety deposit log. Gerald hadn't just witnessed the crime, he had facilitated it. And here, Danica added, opening another file are the sealed financial disclosures. It's everything the IRS needs. I stared at the stacked copies of checks purchase receipts for real estate under shell names and a tax audit summary forged to pass as legitimate. They have enough to bring charges, I asked. Danica nodded. Yes, and they're moving fast. Gerald's going to flip first. Almost on cue, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from a restricted number. I played it on speaker. Gerald's voice cracked through tired and worn. I'm done. I have no more to protect. I'll sign the affidavit. Victor ordered me to destroy the will. I did it. I regret it every day. It wasn't just a confession. It was surrender. That evening, I drove out to the edge of town. The wind had picked up tugging leaves from trees like memories torn loose. Esther's porch light was on, flickering slightly. She opened the door before I knocked as if she'd been waiting. I know why you're here, she said. I stepped in her scent cinnamon and old wood clinging to the air. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound a ticking wall clock. I knew, she said softly, eyes rimmed red. Not everything. But enough. I saw Victor with Gerald the night after your grandfather passed. I heard voices, documents being shuffled. But I was afraid. My hands curled around my cup. You could have said something. I thought they'd come after me too. She looked away. Your grandfather told me once. Sabrina sees everything. She just doesn't always know what to do with it yet. I hoped you'd figure it out. The betrayal stung anew, but I understood now it wasn't weakness. It was survival. We all chose silence until it became unbearable. When I returned home, the news had already broken. I sat in the dark, the glow of my laptop bathing the room in cold blue. The headline pulsed like a heartbeat. Reeves estate faces criminal charges for multi-million-dollar fraud. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply closed the lid, leaned back, and exhaled. Justice didn't roar. It whispered, and then it echoed. It took them decades to build their empire. It took one truth to crack it. The courtroom was louder than before. Cameras flashing, reporters whispering into microphones, lawyers with too many folders and too little control. I could feel the pulse of it thumping through the floorboards, heavy with anticipation. Victor sat 3 rows ahead of me, still in a tailored suit, but no longer fitting into the air of confidence he once carried like armor. His attorneys approached us before the hearing started. Their expressions strained. Our client would like to propose a private resolution, one said, not meeting my eyes. No admission of guilt. A financial settlement. Discreet. Danica didn't glance at me. She didn't have to. My answer had already been written in the fine print of every document we'd submitted. No, I said. He doesn't get silence. The doors opened. Judge Mallory entered. The court stood, then sat in brittle anticipation. I could see former Reeves clients in the gallery, whispering behind hands, some holding thick folders, likely building lawsuits of their own. Victor shifted in his seat, jaw tight. Danica stood, voice calm. Your Honor, we now present tax records from 2019 through 2023, linking Reeves estate funds to international shell companies. The movement aligns with fraudulent write-offs detailed in the ledger. The files projected on the screen beside the bench. Names, accounts, withdrawals, all paths pointed back to Victor. Then I rose. May I asked. The judge nodded. I walked slowly, deliberately. My heels echoed like punctuation. In the appendix of the ledger, I began holding up a slim file, was a reference to an offshore entity, Blue Cove Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands. Danica handed it to the clerk who passed it to the judge. "It's under the name of Richard Caldwell," I said evenly. "My father." Victor turned eyes wide. "I didn't say anything before because I wasn't sure. But now, with these entries and his signature on the offshore filings, I am." Danica leaned into the silence. "We have confirmed Richard Caldwell was the silent partner in at least 3 of the transactions Victor facilitated. These weren't isolated choices. This was systematic." Victor bolted upright. "That's a lie, sit down," the judge snapped. Victor kept standing. "She's making this up. She's just bitter enough," Judge Mallory said. "One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." Danica calmly closed her binder. No further questions. The courtroom swirled in murmurs, again louder now. Judge Mallory lifted his gavel, but didn't strike. "Effective immediately, the court revokes Mr. Victor Caldwell's authority over the Reeves estate and refers this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." He paused. "This court recognizes the submitted will dated October 7th, 2023 as the most recent and legally binding. Sabrina Reeves is named primary beneficiary with full access restored pending federal review." Victor's knees buckled and 2 bailiffs stepped forward as if on cue. He didn't resist. But as they escorted him past me, he turned his head. He didn't glare. He didn't spit some venomous phrase under his breath. He simply looked at me, eyes glassy, breath caught. Not with hate, with recognition. Like he'd finally seen me not as the girl they dismissed in a forgotten will, but as the woman who'd rewritten the ending. Justice is heavy, but walking without it is heavier. I didn't expect the silence to feel so vast. Not lonely, just wide. Like a door had opened where a wall once stood. The court was behind me now. The chaos, the questions, the press, all of it had passed. The house, this battered relic that had once felt like a sentence, was mine again. Not as a possession, as a promise. Derek pulled off his gloves and shook out a bucket of nails on the porch. "We'll start with the siding," he said, his breath fogging in the cold. "Then the insulation. Winter's coming early." I know I said softly, watching the bare trees sway. Inside, I'd already boxed up everything I didn't recognize. The ledger, the false deeds, the frayed scraps of a lie, they were sealed in the past. Today, we were rebuilding. Celeste arrived just after noon, her coat still dusted with snowflakes. I brought something, she said, holding up a shoebox wrapped in an old scarf. Inside, photographs. Dozens of them. Us as kids, me, her, and even Victor, once on the tire swing, out back. My grandfather standing behind us, a hand on each shoulder. "I thought you should have these," she said. "So you remember the parts that weren't lies?" I blinked too fast, my throat thick. We sat for a while in the den, sorting through the memories, the colors faded but intact. It felt like painting over mildew with light. Later that evening, Esther knocked gently on the door. Her hands were trembling not from cold, but from weight of something long overdue. She handed me a wooden box. I kept these, because I didn't know who else would, she said, but they were never mine. Inside were my grandfather's journals, leather-bound, weather-stained. His handwriting was the same as the will, the ledgers, the notes on the cassette tape. Still neat, still deliberate. I thanked her, but she shook her head. "No need." She said, "I should have spoken sooner." But silence felt safer. Until it didn't. We said goodbye on the porch. She didn't look back when she left. That night, I lit a fire in the hearth and opened the journals one by one. Pages of stories, ideas, reflections. Some from before I was born. Some from after my mother left. Some that made me laugh out loud even now. The final entry was dated 3 days before his death. "You'll be the one to set things right." I read it twice. Then again. His words weren't instructions. They were belief. I gathered the forged documents, the fake will, the altered transfers, the duplicates, and fed them to the flames. One by one. Watching as they curled, cracked, and vanished. Derek sat beside me, not speaking. He didn't need to. The house was still drafty. The paint still peeled in corners. The kitchen sink groaned like an old man in protest. But the rot was gone now. Not from the wood, but from the air. In the quiet, I could hear the shift. I hadn't just reclaimed the house. I reclaimed the silence they once used against me. They once erased me with silence. I answered with a signature. The lake was still, its glassy surface barely trembling under the early sun. Mist clung to the edge of the porch like it didn't want to leave either. I sat wrapped in my grandfather's old flannel pen and hand journal on my knees, a quiet warmth rising from the mug beside me. There was no more noise. No court filings, no calls, no threats folded between legal jargon. The house behind me, our house, wasn't haunted anymore. It creaked now, only when it wanted to remind me it was still alive. I let the ink glide. Dear Grandpa, I didn't fight for the house. I fought for your truth. I paused, not because I didn't know what to say next, but because I finally could say it without shaking. I remembered the way my dad laughed in that sterile law office weeks ago. The echo of it used to rattle in my chest like a loose screw. But now, silence, not absence. Just peace. I sealed the journal page and tucked it into an old tin box Celeste had brought over something from our childhood, once filled with marbles and stickers. I carried it barefoot across the frost-dusted lawn, past the oak tree my grandfather had planted before I was born. The ground gave easily under the shovel, like it knew, like it wanted to hold something worth keeping this time. When I pressed the box into the earth and covered it with soil, I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. Some endings are too sacred for punctuation. Back on the porch, my phone buzzed. A text from Celeste. Thanksgiving's at mine. You coming? I replied without thinking. Already found what I needed, but I'll bring pie. Inside, Derek was fixing the kitchen drawer again, not because it was broken, but because he said things deserved to slide smoothly after all this time. He didn't ask where I went that morning. He just handed me coffee and nodded. Once the way people do when words would only make it smaller. The last thing I did that morning was walk barefoot through every room. No shoes, no armor, no fear. The hallway with the faded photos. The living room where we found the safe. The fireplace where forged pages had turned to ash. And finally the attic window where light cut through just right to make dust look holy. I didn't need to reclaim it anymore. It reclaimed me. The wind shifted. And for once, it didn't carry any names I needed to forget. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If you saw pieces of your own story in mine, the quiet betrayals, the laughter that wasn't kind, the long nights of doubt, I want you to know this silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. I didn't yell to win. I listened, I remembered, and I moved forward when it counted. If my story stirred something in you, leave a comment. Remind the world that truth doesn't always arrive with noise. It arrives with evidence, with courage, with stillness. And to anyone still waiting to reclaim their voice, don't rush the storm. Just sharpen your steps.